Sì? Perfetto. Dicevo, proseguiamo con una conversazione, dicevo, a margine di Undavel, lo spettacolo che qualcuno di voi ha visto ieri e qualcuno di voi forse vedrà questa sera, e dicevo proveremo a tenerci in equilibrio senza svelare troppo a chi lo deve vedere questa sera, ma invece provando ad entrare in immersione nello spettacolo per chi l'ha visto. Comincerei, Anthony, se sei d'accordo, dal titolo, che è, come forse avrete letto anche nelle note di regia, un appunto dialogo con il sosia di Dostoevskij, che appunto viene raccontato in parte nello spettacolo, e su questa narrazione torneremo a più riprese nel nostro dialogo, ma che appunto è come provocazione, direi, fin dal titolo. Solo una parola, insomma, per dire che questo romanzo è vertiginoso per certi versi, che è scritto a metà dell'Ottocento, già sembra in qualche modo anticipare alcune riflessioni della psicologia del secolo successivo. C'è appunto un uomo, un eroe, e anche su questa definizione di eroe magari torneremo, che si entra in un abisso psicologico sempre più cupo, e questo ha a che fare anche con l'apparizione appunto di un doppio che lo perseguita e ne assorbe tutte le sue paure più profonde. Comincerei, Anthony, proprio da questo titolo e da cosa ha significato per te lavorare su questo doppio terribile psicologicamente.
Yeah, thank you. The double as an idea is something I think that we all live with. The piece is about the tension between the narrative that you either imagine that you're going to have because you project a story that you think your life is supposed to be, or as things are happening to you, you start to create a narrative. You create a double for yourself because it's what you think your life is going to amount to. So when things change off of that, we have these little tensions. The piece is also about the tension between what we think we should be and what we're actually achieving, what we're actually reaching. And I think as a theater maker, whenever we take a text, a story, or anything that's established, you are bringing in that tension between yourself and the material. You know, the material has existed before you, the material was created, and now we're coming from this moment. And even still, I mean, you set a piece and then you rehearse it and you perform it, but as you're performing it and as you come back to it, you grow in relationship to it. So I think that tension between us and the thing we're saying, you know, the words that we speak, the things that I'm saying that you're hearing, the picture of ourselves as people. I think I see myself a certain way, you see me differently. If you live in that tension, you can kind of go crazy. But there's something very interesting about figuring that out together, because that's what communication is, right? We have to meet in the middle in our communication. Now, we communicate as creatures. The piece also talks about any other social creature that lives in such density. There is no other creature like us, and the only other social creatures that live in such density use biochemical signals to communicate, because it's too crazy to think about free will in this density. But we still have free will. So our work to communicate, to deal with our double, is important work. So we all have doubles. I'm focusing on two devastating doubles in the piece, two devastating real life doubles. But we all have doubles. And so if you can't understand that what you think and how you're presented, or what you're going towards and how you actually are achieving it, is going to be less than accurate. If I think I'm going to be something and I just drive to, you meet those people, they're like, this is my dream, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to do it. Those people are a little overwhelming to me. I think we have to just accept that we have ideas, we have things we have to go towards. As some of the text in the piece says, we have egos, is what drives us forward. But if you can't understand you have an ego, that's going to be met by other people's egos, and you have to balance that, and you have to live in the response. We work a lot with impulse in our piece, we work a lot with presence. In those moments, it's understanding that we have to respond, we have to react, we have to accommodate and accept other stories, other versions of life into our circle. That's the only way we can survive in this, density, and the piece shows ways that we don't survive.
È molto interessante perché si creano dei fili invisibili tra le conversazioni e le persone che stanno animando questo festival. Proprio ieri qui Antonio Latella parlava del suo odio per la parola successo, per la parola carriera, e in qualche modo quello che stai dicendo adesso, no? Sul fatto che questo doppio è come la parte nera di quello che succede seguendo, no? le strategie di successo della società di oggi. C'è un'altra questione che tu poni con molta forza nello spettacolo, che è proprio adesso già accennavi qualcosa, un'interrogazione su quella che è la parola appunto narrazione, narrative, e anche sulle sfumature di violenza che questa parola ha. La narrazione è qualcosa che si impone ad un altro, è qualcosa a volte che ci si autoimpone, e c'è appunto un momento dello spettacolo in cui dici il narratore è colui che ha il controllo, quindi inteso come appunto un demiurgo anche un poco violento. Vorrei che ti soffermassi un poco su questa riflessione sulla natura violenta delle narrazioni.
Yeah, I was talking to, I don't know, maybe my kids about this, and the future that we have for us is, on one level, there are other big moments of extinction that have happened because of a natural disaster, a disease, mosquitoes. But we're very unique in that we bring the destruction onto ourselves. And how can you do that? How can you consciously bring destruction onto yourself? Of course, we are a parasite. We use this earth to its extreme until it's no longer valid. But there's people who fight against that, and I don't think we're purely a parasite, because otherwise we would all do it. And so I think it's this tension inside of what you're saying, the violence of narratives. The violence of narratives is one of the characters we're focusing on, who by trying to prove that he is the guy that he says he can be, and the community that he finds that supports him in that. The difference with the double in Dostoevsky's story is he doesn't have a community to find that supports him in his version of his double. He's saying, look, this is me, I need more respect, you should respect me. But everyone in his community is saying, no, you're just a government clerk, calm down. Nowadays, you can go on the internet and find your group of people that say, yeah, you are this, you are better than that. And then you get into your little community, and then you start one-upping each other until all of a sudden they take real action, and it becomes destructive, and it becomes violent. And why do we, as humans, create such violence? Is to prove something about ourselves. And what are we proving? This is my identity, this is my heritage, this is my narrative, this is going to be the thing that I leave behind. It's crazy. It's very violent.
E anche senza svelare troppo dello spettacolo, il narratore, cioè colui che legge alcune parti del libro, il narratore, dicevo, colui che legge alcune parti del libro in terza persona, è proprio in una posizione fisica di superiorità rispetto agli altri, no? Per raccontare di questa dimensione della violenza di cui parlavi poco fa. Un'altra appunto delle accezioni della parola narrativa che davvero il lavoro di Andable sviscera in tutte le sue, tutti i suoi possibili significati, è anche quello del discorso in terza persona. La forma drammatica non è di per sé, non utilizza di per sé la terza persona, mentre tu hai giocato molto nella tua drammaturgia sull'utilizzo della terza persona, e naturalmente un po' il riferimento che ci viene in mente da questo punto di vista è senz'altro Brecht, che ha aperto la via di un teatro che potesse appropriarsi di questa terza persona. Scherzavamo prima con Anthony dicendo il suo è uno spettacolo brechtiano dopo tutto, allora ti chiedo se ti ritrovi un po' in questa definizione e cosa di quel metodo del Novecento. Questa è una biennale che riflette sui metodi e sui metodi del Novecento, quanto oggi siano per noi delle guide o devono essere lasciati andare. Ecco, questo spettacolo brechtiano lo è, non lo è, cosa di quel metodo invece possiamo lasciarci alle spalle?
Yeah, I mean, I love this topic because, you know, realism, psychological realism, is a piece of the avant-garde. You know, modernism is a piece of the avant-garde. There was a moment in the 1920s when someone in the audience could probably tell me who it was. I don't remember now. But the first show that put like real slabs of beef on stage. You know what I'm talking about? 1920s, I think it was Russia. And it was just this sense of like, you know, you could put the real on stage. We can make people believe it's real. And that was shocking because before it was this very romantic idea of we're going to tell you a story and it's going to be about an individual and it's going to be a journey. But actually to say what you're watching is real. In the living theater, you know, they brought that kind of realism to an extreme where it's like, you know, you don't know what you're watching. Is this real or not, you know? But the idea of realism being of the avant-garde is testing the audience as to, well, what is theater and what is life? But then there became this sort of deviation of the of realism to be this really neat story. And so if you watch something on television now, it's almost like an opiate. You know, that's them. It's not me. I can get lost in their story, and then I come out of it, and I don't think very. It's not very active. It's not very reflective. But Brecht, I think, asked the audience to really be reflective. So as much as he could lull you to sleep with a great story, because the actors in Brecht, as far as I hear, were great actors. You know, you can't just do Brecht and be like, you know, storybook acting. They could drop into the characters, make you believe the characters, and then pull out the characters. And that's very important because it makes you believe what you're watching until you realize, oh no, this is not really the thing that's happening. I'm not watching these people in a kitchen. And Brecht wanted it to be a thing that you when you go to the theater, you walk away with the themes as real and not the characters as real. Because he thought it was almost dangerous to try to trick the audience to believe that these people are real and not show them that it's the theater. Because if you trick the audience and make them believe it's real, they think, oh, that's them, that's their life, that's what they experience, and I can kind of leave and come back into my own life. But he wanted the themes of that story to make you really think and make you really change the way that you lived in the world. I mean, it's very political, his work. So for me, I go back to this quote that I heard once by a German filmmaker, Alexander Kluge, and it's like, the audience, my job as a maker, as a creator, is 50% of the work. And the audience has to do the other 50%. And I want to subvert your expectations. I want you to have to lean in and wonder what you're watching, because it makes you engage with yourself. And if you don't like what we did, if you walk out of that show thinking, they made light of a war criminal, or they're talking about a topic that feels much heavier than what they did with it or something, at least you're thinking about that, you know? And I want that, you know, your position as an audience member to be either challenged or solidified or whatever from watching a piece. So the Brechtian work for me is inherently trying to detach you from seeing the real as what we think the outside world is real, so that we understand what's happening in the theater is another kind of real, which is the topics of conversation. And to say it just simply in a different way, for me, theater is not about taking what's outside and trying to bring it inside and say, look at what's outside, look how well we can put that inside. It's saying, what we make inside can challenge the outside, and can we bring that outside? Can we push a new question about the outside, about what we take for granted out there? And I think that's what Brecht started as a conversation.
Questo elemento su cui adesso stavi insistendo, no? questo movimento di entrata e di uscita, di rapporto dialettico tra un dentro e un fuori, che è appunto molto, molto brechtiano, è nel tuo spettacolo anche molto visibile esteticamente attraverso la presenza di una scatola da cui in effetti voi entrate e uscite, e appunto poi succede anche altro, ma non voglio rovinare la sorpresa a chi vedrà lo spettacolo questa sera. Vorrei che ti soffermassi un momento proprio sull'ideazione di questa scatola scenica, che è un elemento fortissimo dal punto di vista scenografico.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to give a little credit to the team that helped put that box to fruition. Well, Hema Galiana, she's my partner in Useless Room, and she's our co-director on this piece, and every time we would present Wukash, and I would present our work to her, and she would sort of ask what we were doing and challenge what we thought we were doing, and then, you know, we'd say, well, we have this idea for a set piece, and she would, you know, throw it away and, you know, basically tell us it was a bad idea. Until eventually we got to this thing that she and we all worked together and tried to find. And then we have Isaac over there, John Isaac Waters, he's an architect, and so we worked with this architect on the design of it. But yeah, it's a box, and I mean, it's a box with a lot of windows, with a lot of frames, so you can kind of see the story from different frames. The box goes through transformation. But for us, just having something tangible and physical to interact with is always important. You know, it helps guide you, it gives you something real in the space to interact with. We're very physical performers, so the body is important to us, and also the objects, and having objects that carry some structural significance. And then of course, the suggestion of metaphor through objects is important, but spatial metaphors, I think. We talk a lot about spatial metaphors.
Abbiamo appunto parlato di come The Undouble sia in qualche modo un thriller psicologico per certi versi, e ricordo soltanto qui che tra le opere che si sono più esplicitamente richiamate al sosia di Dostoevsky c'è appunto un thriller nerissimo come Il Cigno Nero di Aronofsky, e in qualche modo questo carattere cupo di thriller psicologico si trova appunto anche in The Undouble. Dall'altra parte abbiamo parlato invece di un distanziamento brechtiano, e già qui forse chi non ha visto lo spettacolo comincia a farsi un'idea della complessità anche dell'impianto, e con la prossima domanda che farò ad Anthony capirete quanta complessità teorica ci sia, e a un certo momento, anzi in più di un punto, il testo fa riferimento a Platone e al ruolo che Platone dà alle narrazioni, perché appunto come ricorderete a un certo punto della sua carriera Platone decide che il teatro e le forme di narrazioni andrebbero escluse dalla società ideale, dalla Repubblica. E in qualche modo mi sembra che tu evidentemente non pensi che il teatro vada escluso da una comunità, tutt'altro, ma allo stesso tempo condividi la consapevolezza che in effetti le narrazioni e quindi anche il teatro possano essere molto pericolose.
Yeah, I mean, Plato was kind of fascist in that idea. You know, Plato was like, we need to control what people see and how they respond because we don't trust them. And at that time there was a belief in the gods as really the organizers of the world, but there was always, you know, in the Greeks there was more choice and freedom to how people reacted to the gods, and so if you did it wrong, there would be consequences. And so Plato's ideal society was how you avoid angering the gods. But, you know, also, when I think of Plato, I also think of Barbara Bush, because Barbara Bush, I think it was Barbara Bush, who was really into the parental advisory sticker on CDs. That was like, this is adult content, there's swear words, and then she wanted to get rid of like all these, she wanted to censor a lot of music. There's always censorship, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't think censorship works. But I think it's very interesting as to why Plato wanted to censor this story. Because the censorship was because of what people are too pulled into. They get heated, they get excited, they start imagining themselves in these lives. So the question is, do we actually change ourselves? Do we actually change our lives by the narratives we hear and see? And I think we do, right? It's a realization that everyone goes through when they're like 16. They're like, wait a minute, all of my love life is just what I see in movies, you know? Like, what is different? What else could there be? And as a theater maker, it's great because we have this power to present different versions of life on stage. But my piece is not a way you can live life. You can't jump between like different realities all the time and comment on it and lecture about it. But what you can do is you can tell people to think differently about their own existence, rather than lull them to believe in this kind of path. So the narrative structure, the idea of narrative that Plato was so afraid of, was the story that kind of stuck, which is narratives are attractive, right? You look at it like successful Broadway shows, big theater pieces, big movies, it's all a narrative, you know? Those are the ticket selling things. Our show, you know, we'll see how many tickets it sells. But it's not something that we want to participate in. The idea that we'll just come to your expectations as an audience, we'll feed you the opiate that you want, and then the belief system actually becomes like a real indoctrination. So you see the power of narratives. And so this is the challenge of against it. But I don't think we're really going to remove ourselves from narratives. So it's just having that critical lens so that we can actually support people when their narratives aren't working out for them. Because at the end of the day, too, we're talking about a guy who was very radicalized by not having a support network in a certain way.
Sì, ho trovato molto interessante il modo in cui hai appunto problematizzato la questione, perché normalmente giustamente gli innamorati del teatro tendono a dire ma come poteva Platone portare fuori il teatro dalla sua Repubblica, ma in realtà la questione che poni sulla potenza degli immaginari è una questione che in Italia si sta sempre di più ponendo, per esempio su ciò che c'è dentro i testi delle canzoni più famose o anche le favole per bambini, quali immaginari portano dentro. Essere consapevoli della potenza degli immaginari è, credo, molto, molto importante. E a proposito di questioni filosofiche, il tuo spettacolo si apre con una frase che ti vorrei chiedere di commentare, che è "Form is tricky". La forma è insidiosa, pericolosa.
I like, okay, so the beginning of the show starts with the monologue. Form is tricky. Form is tricky, but narrative is a trick. I don't know the translation, if it works. Just go for it.
We don't have the same word, but yeah.
So the idea, though, is when you create anything, for me, I'm thinking about the structure that I can put the content into. And I don't think of it beforehand. It's kind of a result, it's a reaction. But we think about the body, for us, again, even though this piece is very dense with text, Hema and I lead in from the body on a lot. And the body guides us as to the authentic place you want to be. And the text is something that it's pulling you in different directions. It is an impulse, it is a guide. Text is action. But at the end of the day, if you're leaving a sort of maybe map on the floor, you have the body's map and you have the text's structure. And these two things together, I think, make the form that we're talking about. We're not saying we're going to make a Brechtian piece or, you know, a symbolic piece or something. So the form is hard to figure out, but once you figure out the form, then you know how to break it, you know how to play with it, you know what you're doing, you know what you're going to next, because your form is about like consistency and logic, and you are bringing people into something. Even though our play is always breaking itself, it's all super structured so that you can follow it, right? And you go into that world. So instead of getting sucked into a character, you know, you watch a movie and you're like, okay, now I'm going to believe this character and I'm going to follow that character's world. For us, it's more, now you're going to fall into the rhythm of the structure of this world. So the form is important for that because it's consistent, even when you break it. Form is tricky to figure out what you're going to do, but narrative is a total lie. It's a complete lie. It's a lie to tell truths, so narrative is another kind of form. It is, right? But if you watch something and you get so caught up in it. You're like, I can live that life, or I can be that person, or that person's real. It's tricky because if you watch a documentary, that's a real person, right? And you're watching their narrative because we have narratives. But you're looking backwards on your life. You don't know where your life's going to go. And so if you start projecting your life forward, it's going to be a disappointment. It's going to be a fallacy. So narratives come as a result, but you can't create the narrative. And narrative is just another word for another kind of form. So you can do anything. And I think a lot of the conversation we're having is you can be physical, you can be present, you can be in the moment. There's a really great idea that, well, what's the solution to all of this? What's the solution to these narratives that you create? And one proposed solution is, the quote is, I'm very fond of this idea that we get to walk each other home, that we get to be together. Because when we're together, we're not faced looking at ourselves, and we're responding, and we're reacting, and we're present. And that's it. Then you don't think about your narrative anymore, because it's immediate. When we work physically, partner work is so much easier than solo work, because there's somebody there responding to. So when we're doing solo work, we're always talking about the idea of a partner, just to help ourselves get out of our heads. What is a partner? Your text, your costume, the set, another person.
Questo spunto, appunto la narrazione è una bugia, per dire la verità credo che lo porterò domani pomeriggio anche a Milorao, che lavora esattamente su questa questione, quindi porteremo avanti il discorso anche domani senz'altro. Rispetto alle funzioni del teatro, sulle quali rifletti moltissimo, vorrei soffermarmi un po' sul nome che avete scelto con anche Gemma per la tua compagnia, che è The Useless Room, no? Quindi una zona di inutilità. Ecco, su questa inutilità vorrei che dicessi qualcosa.
Yeah, again, this is Hema, my company. Hema came up with this idea based on an Oscar Wilde quote that all art should be useless, but it also aligns with another big influence of ours, which is Wittkacy, the Polish playwright and philosopher and painter, and just like idiot savant, enfant terrible, everything, drug addict, incredible person, fascist. Failed suicide attempt, real suicide attempt, incredible person. And his philosophy is called pure form. And it's so beautiful for me because the pure form idea is like, okay, a watch, there is a version of the watch that tells time. And that's all you need, right? All the little details on the watch, all the little designs on the watch is excessive, right? So when you're talking about art, what is the pure form? What is the pure form of just that thing doing its purpose? And it's this chance to strive for something that is a tool to navigate the unknown. For him, the idea of art is the way you can have a dialogue with what's unknown. Because the unknown is inaccessible, inherently, in the name of it. And so by using art as a tool to go towards the unknown, you create something that is essentially its own piece of use. It doesn't have any other purpose except to navigate this thing that you don't even know where it is. You can't even define what it is. Like a watch is telling time, we know what time is. But the question on the other side of art, we don't know. And that's this pursuit. And we believe in that idea that we're not trying to do something with an agenda. We're really trying to respond to the unknown, the great beauty, the mystery of what existence is. Because if life becomes too practical, you know, what's it all for?
Questa Biennale sta, appunto, lo dicevamo già, riflettendo sui metodi e sui maestri. Nel tuo percorso c'è una tappa importante al Grotowski Institute e volevo chiederti di raccontarci un po' di quella tappa del tuo percorso e quanto l'insegnamento di Grotowski, che in qualche modo anche nella prima parte di questa Biennale è stato un punto tra quelli discussi, è stato importante e rilevante nella tua formazione di artista.
Yeah, it was really significant. The first day we arrived, there was a talk here with Eugenio Barba, with Richard Schechner, and we first met in Wrocław. Emma and I, we met in Wrocław, and the first time I was really touring with work, there was a festival that was the 10th year after Grotowski's death, and it was called The World is a Place of Truth. Eugenio Barba was there, Pina Bausch, Tadashi Suzuki, Richard Schechner. It was a really significant chance when I was 23 just to watch this work. At that point, I just finished my undergrad training with this man here, Jurek Rodansky, who's here. And we decided, in my training, my undergrad, there was another person who talked about Grotowski. And it was very repulsive for me. I was like, this is not interesting to me. This is this whole thing about if you don't get it, I'm going to perform something. I'm going to perform physical actions, and I'm going to perform movement. And if you don't get it, sorry, you don't get it. It's like it didn't translate. It didn't reach across to the audience. And I felt like theater is about that. And Grotowski, of course, turned his back on the audience at some point. There's a whole conversation about that, which I think is interesting. But in the moment that I was learning it, it was a presentation of theater. It was on stage for an audience, and it was very abstract, very inaccessible, and I thought it was very elitist and useless, not in a good way. And very pretentious. And then when I got to Wrocław, I got to see all this work happening in, real inspiration, connection to what Grotowski had left behind. And there was one company called Teatro Czar, and they had a member of their company, Mate Matejka, who was starting his own company. And this performer has an amazing way to speak with his body. And when you see his work, it feels urgent, it feels practical, it feels alive. And as in my background as a person, I always felt the physical is a place for authenticity on stage. As much as we're talking about ideas and trying to communicate, I'm the Prince of Denmark and I'm jealous and all this stuff. It's like, the truth is, if I move closer to you, I move closer to you, right? That's real. And how do we feel when those things happen? And those are truthful moments that the physical can bring on stage. And I also liked durational and challenging physical tasks because I felt like it got out of your head. And then I met this guy, Mate, who started this company. And so his company, he was just starting the company, I auditioned for it, and we joined this company for two to 3 years. And it was just this thing, working for hours in the same space, exploring the body, trying to understand tools to use the body, and stealing from dance, stealing from martial arts, using everything we could, but still with like a question of the actor. And I think the difference with the actor and the dancer is a big conversation, but a lot of it has to do with, I think, the intention, the state that we're coming from and responding to. I think choreography can very much be okay from the outside. Formally, people can do great things with their bodies, but as an actor, we're driving from the inside out a lot of the time. So the physicality was precise in a way that I had never experienced before, so I started to build a code to what physicality was, based in anatomy, based in impulse and listening and response. And we were training in this state where, with theater, with the idea of being present in these intense periods of training, you have a very strange feeling of being like underwater, and you are completely content. It's like you don't want anything else. You're okay. Your body is so activated, and you're so present. And it's a weird feeling because all the ideas you used to have about what you thought you wanted to be as an actor, what you thought you wanted to do in your work, it kind of fades away. You're just there in this moment because you're so exhausted and you're so present. You don't have any energy left to be anywhere else. And I think it's a very powerful state, but it also feels a little bit like you get lost. And so having to come back, we spent a lot of time working more with dance. We spent some time with a performer who worked a lot with TV8. And that world is a little bit more communicative outwards. And so I think Grotowski's work gave his actors in the 60s and 70s a chance to process some physical trauma from World War II, and also to work outside of being censored by the communist occupation that was happening in Poland at the time, and reach an authenticity through exhaustion. But where we are now in our lives is not that. We're not coming out of World War II. We're not coming out of these sorts of traumas of censorship. So the physical that Grotowski inspired in us is really just an idea of putting yourself into pure presence and then seeing where you are, what you're responding to. So by putting ourselves into pure presence in this piece, and then putting the layers of the narrative and the questions about the content of what the double is and what being a double is, you get to balance those two worlds. I'm here present and I'm responding to a question, so I get to respond authentically, again. And so that, I'd say that's like, it's a tool for authenticity for us.
Hai citato appunto Grotowski, ma hai citato anche Pina Bausch, e quelle due ricerche tra gli altri infiniti modi in cui sono state di ispirazione per molti, lo sono state anche perché, come proprio adesso dicevi, hanno invogliato gli spettatori e gli artisti a pensare molto poco per categorie, teatro fisico, coreografia, teatro di testo, ma a mescolare le categorie. Cosa che tu fai nel tuo lavoro, perché c'è un lavoro appunto molto fisico, di lavoro sul corpo e anche di coreografia a tutti gli effetti, ma lo mescoli con un lavoro sul testo. E su questo volevo chiederti due cose. La prima è, se guardi al presente, alla scena contemporanea, ti sembra che le barriere siano infine state abbattute davvero, o che in qualche modo queste barriere esistono ancora e che ogni volta vadano riabbattute, le barriere tra il lavoro sul corpo, il lavoro sul testo, la coreografia? E la seconda cosa che volevo chiederti su questo, nel catalogo c'è una frase che tu hai scritto che mi ha molto colpito, che è: il corpo è la prigione del testo. E se hai voglia di commentarla.
Yeah, I think on the first point, we are looking for what speaks to us, and Grotowski's work and any of the forms before are really retrospectively turned into a style or a form, right? So the distinction between choreography and text is huge, right? Those are just really giant platforms or giant fields. But if we're talking about the ways that Pina Bausch or the ways that Grotowski or the ways that Meyerhold or whoever worked, you have just someone asking questions and they document it. I mean, thank God for Eugenio Barba, right? We wouldn't have Grotowski if it wasn't for Eugenio Barba. I don't know. I don't think. You kind of need someone who wants to put these perspectives down. Richard Schechner is incredibly academic about his documentation of the work, you know? I think, you know, Willem is an incredible person to have documented, but you know, you need to document him. Who's doing the documentation, right? Where do these people become held as something we can look back to? And just know it's a jumping off point. It's just a platform. It's not law, and it's not God. And so we need to just keep moving forward with the tools we have and see where we can go with them. So the only way I would say the distinction between text and choreography resonates with me is I didn't train as a ballet dancer since I was 11. So I don't have that form, but I think you could have a dancer up here and talk a long time about what choreography is. What is it? What is choreography? So that's on that point. And then the other question, that the body is a prison for text or whatever I said. I just think that we are held to a responsibility for our text and what we say to a point where we are so regulated by what we say and how we say it. But I think text is it's a pursuit towards something, it's a journey towards something, it's an action. Text for me is action. Text for me is trying to figure out a conversation or a complicated topic and going together with the audience. So if I talk about theater, it needs to have a journey, and the journey is not the character's journey necessarily, but maybe it's the philosophical journey on a topic of trying to understand a topic, a complicated topic together, and we do that with action, with all the tools we have. So I just think if we hold text as you said it, and that's what it is, and it needs to be held as such, it does imprison you. But if you think of it as something that you can deconstruct and use as, you know, instead of a box, but a scaffolding or something that can break open towards, you know, different stairways and pathways and hallways, it's less restrictive.
Questa biennale, tra le altre cose, ragiona molto sulle pedagogie. Un momento della tua formazione lo abbiamo visto appunto al Grotowski Institute. Ti chiedo se vuoi magari raccontare un'altra tappa della tua formazione che è stata importante, qualche incontro che per te è stato particolarmente rilevante ancora, e invece volevo interrogare te come maestro, perché ti occupi molto di pedagogia all'Institute of Arts, e invece appunto tu nel fare pedagogia, nel porti con degli allievi e delle allieve, qual è appunto l'approccio che hai?
Yeah, I feel lucky to sort of treat the people who have influenced me as sort of points on a map in a way, and there are people who are very significant on that journey. I would say one of the first kind of starting points is this man here. And then we, you know, finding myself in Poland and Mathematica was very influential for us. And this is, you know, just to say where like these legacies kind of line up, you know, you have a line. If you go from Jura, you can go up to his teacher, Lev Dodin, you can go up to Stanislavski. And if you go to Mate, you can go to Wilhelm from Farm in the Cave, and you can go to Gardenitsa, and you can go to Grotowski. And so you can trace these lines, and things start to be like, you know, the inheritance. And look, that's all you get in theater. You only get the real contact with the work when you're in the room with the work. And to yesterday be able to perform my work for, you know, people who do have significant influence on me as experimental theater makers, you know, Richard Scheckner seeing the work, having that moment of sharing actual space is important, because otherwise you can be influenced by the reading of it, but having a little bit more contact. 8 years ago, I did a master class here at the Biennale with Willem as my teacher, and it was important. You know, it was a question for me to understand what is action from someone who is very capable of presenting narrative too, right? And that's interesting for me as a performer. So I was able to sort of find my way along these paths. This other woman who I worked with, Vivian Wood, she performed with DV8 for a really long time. Now I'm working with 2 dancers from Pina Bausch's company, Julie Stanzik and Julie Shanahan, and these are like iconic dancers from eras of Pina. They've been working with Pina since the beginning. And it's so significant to have the chance to share space, to get some of the DNA into you. So when I talk to my students, I say, look, there is no map. There is no method. We are sharing with you what's worked for us, but along the way, you understand that you're making a map. And when you go into the experimental, or when you go into any practice, again, you're going into the unknown. You're building much more of an important structure for yourself versus if you just say, like, here's my Bible, here's my book, here's my Stanislavski, and I only do that. And look, there's an amazing industry of just working off of Meisner technique, you know? The film industry is incredibly fruitful, and they're very believable actors, and the way film triggers your brain to believe in it, that's the thing. But we're asking a different question, I think. We're asking, how do you challenge forms to progress things that maybe need to be progressed, because is it a tool to help gather this catharsis, put ourselves together, be together, so we don't have to be alone? Because if you're alone, you can watch Netflix alone. And maybe that's a dangerous thing, you know? I mean, there's just as far as what we think the art is useful for. So with my students, I teach movement. My work is physical, and it is movement from a perspective of the actor. That you have an objective, you have an action, but you can have an objective that's physical. You can have an objective to isolate your wrist. You can have an objective to move across the room with your shoulder, and then you can have a conflict that your feet don't move when your shoulder gets to its limit, and then how do you continue to move? And that just gives you active, sort of tangible steps and presence. And then you have to ask, well, what's it all for? And so if you look at our show, The Double, you see how we start layering the movement in a metaphorical way, even though it's still very action. It's not image-based. It's not storytelling. It's not saying, look at the double, there's 2 of us. We're listening to each other. We're trying to be active and responsive. And then the byproduct is there's an image of 2 people together, but we're not thinking about showing you that image, which is maybe different than what some more like pantomime type movement work is.
Molto bella questa immagine della mappa della pedagogia, la mappa delle formazioni e degli incontri. E a proposito di mappe, questa volta più geografiche, tu stai in California, però nella tua famiglia hai una storia di spostamenti geografici, tuo papà viene dalla Bulgaria e la mia domanda è se questa dimensione geografica di spostamenti della tua famiglia e della tua storia in qualche modo pensi che abbia influenzato il tuo modo di guardare l'arte?
Well, I will just say quickly that during this process of our show, it's a 2.5-year process to create the show. We were going to have our premiere last year, but my father passed away in January, and it was a shock. We were in rehearsal, and we found out, and so this piece is significantly influenced and dedicated to him. And he was a biomedical engineer, but very into all of the obscure arts. Everything from Walter Hill was my influence from him. But things like Roberto Bolaño, everything that felt really dense, Thomas Pynchon was my father. And that gives me kind of this world of interest in the density. I love a long sentence. I love reading a book and be like, well, I gotta read that paragraph again. That was one sentence. And Bolaño is amazing for that. Bolaño, just incredible. But my influences around culture, I think, when I would travel places or be in Bulgaria, I would like to read sort of what was happening, who were the writers from that area, and what is the theater from that era. So a lot of time in Poland, seeing theater that was not subtitled, and I didn't speak Polish very well, and I just watched theater and not know exactly what I'm watching. So you kind of get this osmosis of influence. But then places that I've never traveled to before, spent a lot of time with literature from Argentina and South America, and I think that there's a connection still, because if you talk about, there's something rigorous about the mind that comes out of the post-communist experience, but even beforehand, I mean, Dostoevsky, like I say in the piece, was put on a firing squad, and he didn't get shot, and that was before he started writing. I mean, another great writer who I love is Gary Larson, is the comic artist for The Far Side, but he talks about a jellyfish that got thrown on his face when he was a kid. I really think that there's something significant about life that comes out of a little bit of a shock. And I think living through, this is my personal experience because I'm not coming from a family that comes out of Central Africa or comes out of Asia, but coming from Central and Eastern Europe, there's been so many fractured identity questions that there's a brilliance to navigating what it means to actually have an identity. And I think Dostoevsky is talking about that, but I'm trying to think of, like, Vikati, but also Gombrowicz. There's really great writers who subvert identity. I mean, Gombrowicz is just a terrible, destructor of anything that feels sacred. And it's so beautiful to see because you can't hold on to anything when there's war around you, when a country's border is changing, or, it's like, we don't really know what that's like. I don't know what that's like. I mean, I'm feeling something in the United States now, which is a little bit of a tension around this, but the thing that you hold on sacred and dearly, again, to go back to narrative, it can be devastating if you hold on to it too much. Devastating to the effect of creating civil war, destroying families, believing in something that you don't need to believe in. And these writers who were really able to remove themselves and talk about really the grander experience of life through the avant-garde, to use the avant-garde to diffuse the pressures of identity. I mean, look at war. War is about identity, I think. I mean, it's about resources too, but it really does have this question of, I don't know, Czesław Miłosz was also a very important writer that I read in the book The Captive Mind, and just the idea of what we start to believe in, and how communism was a period of time when They would give people who were not the most brilliant people positions of power so that they could really believe that they deserved that position of power, to really inflate their commitment to the indoctrination of the system. It's a tool. It's a conscious tool to manipulate people. So I think my experience with a father who's an immigrant, knowing that you can leave your home, you don't need to hold anything too dearly, allows that trust that you, the space that you take up, is all that you really can control. The last thing I'll say, and I'll let you go, continue, but the Roberto Bolaño quote that I come to, because he was in exile. Roberto Bolaño was in exile from Chile. And he says, exile is the chance for the human to become the true size, because you're not inflated by your country, you're not inflated by your identity. It's just a chance for you to be your true size in exile. It's terrifying, but also liberating.
Questa questione per chi vedrà lo spettacolo da stasera sentirete l'eco di questa questione sull'identità, perché lo spettacolo insiste anche molto sull'intreccio tra storia individuale e collettiva. Un'ultima domanda e andiamo a chiudere perché abbiamo già finito il nostro tempo. Appunto abbiamo parlato di pedagogie, di maestri, questa Biennale mette al centro anche la figura dell'attore, dell'attrice. Sappiamo che il Leone d'Argento è dato quest'anno a un'attrice, Orsina Lardi, e quindi questa domanda è a te come attore, come performer. In che modo i tuoi compagni di scena sono dei maestri per te mentre fai questo spettacolo?
How have I learned from them?
Yeah, at the evening, doing the show.
Oh yeah, we have, first of all, the two other actors on stage, Łukasz Krzysztofski and Chris Pollock. They're fantastic performers. Łukasz is a dancer by training, and we've thrown him into the terrifying expectation to speak, and he loves it. And Chris just works at a chocolate shop, and we told him to act. No, he's a great actor. We've worked together for decades. We really have. 10, 12 years ago was the first show I did with Łukasz, and about the same time, 12 years ago, was the first show I did with Chris. And so we work together with people that we can kind of trust and know. And then with Hema, who's also a performer. Hema's a performer, so the four of us together in the room is a very exciting and volatile and demanding space. And we challenge each other. I feel comfortable bringing things to the group that I don't have the answer for, and I'm ready for them to not like it, not enjoy it. I want to do it, and I'll fight for it, and we'll see if it works out. Nothing is held dearly, but we all kind of go with what we believe. We follow our impulses. We're looking at our piece with the idea of precision. We structure it, it's repeatable, it is what it is. But I told the performers yesterday, and I think it's very true, we're working with them because of their personalities, and every impulse they have inside of the structure is very important because it's their personality in the piece. So really we're learning from each other by knowing that together when we have a form, any questions or tensions or ideas that you have inside of that are valid and welcome, and we have to respond to it. If we want something, we have to respond to. And Hema is there on the outside, challenging us, telling us what's not working, and we don't have to just bow down and say yes. We can challenge that idea, and before you know it, together we all reach these points of stasis or like connection and equilibrium until something shifts, and then we have to do it again. But another note, working with Łukasz for 2 years on this piece has been incredible because he is, as a dancer, co-creator. He's worked with so many wonderful choreographers, and for us in the beginning, we would just be in a room, an empty room like this, and just go for hours, and we would film it, and then look back on our film and try to find material that we could work with, and slowly develop material. A great line of creation help that I got from this DV8 performer was just create material. The first thing to do in the room is just create material. Don't think about it too much, just start creating material, and then you can use that material later on. And it's the devising process, which is challenging.
quello che dici, questo puro ascolto nel presente, mi sembra che appunto abbia un eco molto forte in questa ricerca su il corpo nel presente, che è appunto una delle linee di questa Biennale. Grazie mille Anthony, mi permetto di invitarvi, se qualcuno di voi ha delle curiosità, a fermare Anthony ora che avete l'opportunità di averlo nella sala, perché è molto felice di rispondervi, anche più magari informalmente, e auguro a chi vedrà lo spettacolo questa sera una buona visione. Grazie e a domani.
Thank you.